I'm here at the Presidio in San Diego to explore the first permanent European settlement that was here in California. Now, the Presidio was first established in 1769, and it wasn't just a settlement in the traditional sense. It was also considered a fortification. This was the original site of the first mission established by Father Junipero Serra, which ultimately moved to where it is today, which you can see in another video that I had made. Now, today, there are no original buildings from the Presidio from the 18th or 19th century that still exist. But in the 1930s, they did rebuild a lot of different portions or buildings and things to kind of give you an idea of what it would have looked like and the size it would have taken up. The site of the Presidio is on a hill overlooking San Diego Bay, which was strategically chosen by the Spanish. This enabled them to overlook the entire harbor and see the approach of any vessels from miles out. It also gave them a commanding view and position over the local people, the Kumeyaay, who were in this area, and had inhabited this specific area for quite some time. Now, this Presidio site wasn't just a former Spanish fortification and settlement, it's also a cemetery. The Spanish and settlers were buried here for many years into about the 1840s, and the Kumeyaay also buried their people here well past that time. Now, back here on the other side of the parking lot, inside of the yellow wall, which marks the original outline of the Presidio as it would have looked in 1790, there are a lot of interesting things to see. The first one that kind of caught my eye is this older brick staircase, which, you know, may not have been here that long, but it seems to have been abandoned, as it starts right up here where what, you know, would have led to the sidewalk is now just kind of covered in bushes and branches and trees and such. But the staircase, if you follow it down, will lead you here into this clearing or this opening. And here in this opening, you actually see some mounds and some topography and some rises. And what you're seeing here is actually the ruins, or what is essentially left in the footprint of the original Presidio buildings. Now today, none of the original buildings from the 18th or 19th century exist. Everything you see here that is built, particularly painted yellow, such as the wall and the buildings, most of those were built in the 1930s by the WPA, which we actually talked about in the last video. But it's kind of cool to be able to walk around down here and see the ruins, the outline, and again, essentially the footprint of what the Presidio was. From this angle, you can get a better view of the footprint that still exists here of the Presidio site. And similar to some old earthen fortifications back east, that's kind of what this reminds me of, but you can get a better idea of what the building sizes were like here. And one thing I noticed over here is you can actually see brick sticking through the grass, and I don't know if any of this is original, but this looks to be pretty old, so it's kind of neat to still see remnants of older sites and buildings that would have been here again at the Presidio site. Off here to the side, kind of tucked away behind the trees, is this pretty remarkable brick cross. And it looks like it is dedicated to Father Junipero Serra, who we've talked about before as essentially the founder of the Spanish mission system here in San Diego. And of course, he was here in 1769 when the Presidio site was first settled. And of course, when the mission was initially established here prior to moving to where it is today. And over here off to the side, I noticed a plaque on the ground, and it just reads, Presidio Park, December 29th, 1981. The Presidio Hill Society, Children of the American Revolution. Now, I'm familiar with the Daughters and the Sons of the American Revolution. I don't think I've ever heard of the Children of the American Revolution, so I'll have to do a little bit of digging into that, but I'm not really sure why this plaque is here. You can even see the Children of the American Revolution emblem there. Yeah, it doesn't really say anything else, and it's kind of in a random spot, so not entirely sure why this is here. When Mexico gained its independence in 1821, the Presidio fell under Mexican rule. Now, from 1825 until 1829, this was actually the site of the Mexican governor's palace. And by 1835, it was in ruins and was all but abandoned. Now, over here on the corner is a recreation of a bastion, which would have been at the corner or the edge of the Presidio, which could have been utilized to place either artillery on or soldiers on, or just act as generally as a lookout tower. But what's interesting about this tower is its name and the folklore that comes with it. Today it is known as the Witch's Tower. Although it really has no verifiable history that has to do with witches or the occult or anything of that nature, and because it was built in the 1930s, it's really not that old or that historic. But over the years, due to the internet and people's stories and whatnot, it has become known as the Witch's Tower, and we'll go into a little bit of why it may be called that. All right, and here we're actually going to go up to the top of what is known as the Witch's Tower, and the first thing I see that's a little, I guess, odd, or maybe comforting, depending on how you look at it, are these crosses that are marked on each step. It's not too high up, thankfully. Oof. A little rough up here. I kind of expected this in terms of seeing the pentagram made out of bricks. Nothing that I could find in my research explains why this design is on top of this tower. Of course, this pentagram is also one of the reasons why it's called the Witch's Tower. Many people claim to have seen a lot of spooky things around here. So I think just maybe the combination of this being a cemetery, this strange design here on top of the tower, and I'm sure a couple other things that have gone on up here give it that name, Witch's Tower. Also wanted to point out on the side of the Witch's Tower is a tablet. And this one really caught my eye. It's dedicated to a man named Sylvester Pattie, who is known as a Pathfinder. And he was born in the state of Kentucky, or at least, I guess it wasn't a state at the time, but he was born in Kentucky on August 25th, 1782. He served as an officer in the War of 1812, and he led an expedition, as it says here, the party of the first Americans into Alta California over southern trails. And they arrived here at the San Diego Presidio on March 27th, 1828. And he died near this spot on April 24th, 1828. And it says here that he was the first American buried in California soil. I guess some things on the internet say that he was held in prison here within the tower. We already touched on it. This was obviously built in the 1930s, but he did die here at the Presidio and is buried somewhere nearby. So along with the many other native people, settlers, immigrants, Mr. Sylvester Pattie is also buried here at the park. I realize I neglected to talk about the most prominent building here at Presidio Park, which is the Father Junipero Serra Museum. Now, when Presidio Hill was purchased in 1907 by a man named George Marston, he decided to build a park in the 1920s. And in 1929, he donated it to the city of San Diego. And as mentioned, the most prominent building here, which is not original, is the museum here. And unfortunately, it's closed today, but if anybody's driven down the I-5 North or on the I-8 here in San Diego, you most likely have seen this towering white building atop Presidio Hill, which is, a fitting monument not just to Father Serra, but also the many Native Americans, the Kumeyaay, immigrants, settlers, Spanish Americans, explorers, you name it, that have called the Presidio home, or may have lived here, or may even be buried here. Okay, so the Witch's Tower wasn't as spooky or interesting as I expected, but the Presidio's role in California history makes this site well worth visiting. From the first permanent European settlement in California to the final resting place for the first American buried in the state, the Presidio is rich with history. I hope you've enjoyed this trip. Now it's on to the next journey.